Evan never imagined that agreeing to a blind date would make him feel so exposed. He sat at a small corner table in the cafe, the hum of quiet conversations and clinking cups filling the air, nodding politely as the woman across from him spoke. She wasn't unkind, and she wasn't boring, but nothing about the moment felt right. His thoughts drifted, his fingers traced the rim of his coffee cup, and with every passing minute he felt more certain that he was only there because he didn't know how to say no. He had barely taken a sip when the door opened, the bell chiming softly. Evan looked up without thinking, and his chest tightened. Standing just inside the cafe was Lena, his neighbor. The same Lena who waved at him every morning from her porch, who laughed with him over minor disasters like broken fences and lost packages, who somehow made ordinary days feel lighter. For a second, time slowed. Her eyes met his, surprise flickering across her face before settling into something quieter, harder to read. Evan looked away too quickly. A strange mix of guilt and confusion washed over him, even though he had done nothing wrong. Still, his pulse raced. He suddenly became painfully aware of how this must look, him sitting there on a date, while the one person he had never quite stopped thinking about watched from across the room. Lena hesitated, as if deciding whether to approach him, then turned instead and ordered a drink. She didn't smile. She didn't wave. That absence hurt more than any reaction would have. The blind date kept talking, unaware of the silent storm unfolding just a few steps away. Evan tried to focus, but the words blurred together. All he could think about was the way Lena had looked at him, not angry, not jealous, just quietly disappointed. That expression stayed with him even after she left, the door closing softly behind her. When the date finally ended, Evan walked home alone, the evening air cool against his face. The street felt different, heavier. As he passed Lena's house, her porch light glowed warmly, just like always. For the first time, he wondered if the comfort he had been protecting was actually the chance he had been avoiding. The next evening, Evan stepped outside with a small trash bag in his hand, hoping the cool air would quiet his thoughts. Ever since the cafe, Lena's expression had replayed in his mind on a loop. He told himself he was overthinking it, that neighbors were allowed to have private lives, that a blind date meant nothing. Still, his chest tightened as he crossed the short distance toward the curb. Rough date. Her voice came from behind him, calm but unmistakable. Evan turned slowly. Lena stood on her porch, one hand resting on the railing, her posture relaxed but her eyes alert. The porch light framed her face, making the moment feel far more serious than a casual neighborly exchange. "You saw that, huh?" he said, forcing a weak smile. She nodded and took a step closer, stopping at the edge of the porch. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence felt loaded, stretching between them like a question waiting to be asked. Evan opened his mouth to say something ordinary, about work, about the weather, but the words wouldn't come. "Why didn't you ask me out instead?" Lena said quietly. The question hit him harder than he expected. He stared at the ground, then back at her, searching for an answer that wouldn't sound cowardly. The truth pressed against his chest, uncomfortable and undeniable. He had thought about asking her out more times than he could count. He had imagined it while fixing the fence, while carrying groceries, while standing on that same sidewalk pretending not to care. "I didn't think you'd say yes," he admitted at last. Lena studied him, her expression softening. "You never gave me the chance to say no." Evan let out a slow breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. He confessed how easy it had felt to keep things the way they were, how familiarity felt safer than risk. He told her the blind date wasn't about wanting someone else, but about trying to move forward without shaking the ground beneath his feet. Lena listened without interrupting. When he finished, she smiled, not teasing, not smug, just honest. "Sometimes the safest choice is the one that scares you a little," she said. As Evan walked back toward his door, the night felt different. Lighter. The question Lena had asked lingered with him, but now it wasn't a regret. It was an invitation. A week passed, and Evan realized how much silence could say. Every morning he still saw Lena's porch light flick on at the same time, still crossed paths with her by the mailbox, but something had changed. There was a new awareness in the air, a shared understanding neither of them rushed to name. Instead of feeling awkward, it felt like a pause before something important. On Friday evening, Evan stood in his kitchen staring at his phone, then set it down. This wasn't something he wanted to do through a message or a half-joking comment over the fence. He straightened his jacket, took a deep breath, and walked next door. Each step felt heavier than the last, not because he was unsure, but because he finally cared enough to do it right. Lena opened the door before he could knock a second time. She looked surprised, then curious. Evan swallowed, his voice steady despite the nerves. "I kept thinking about what you said," he began. "About letting you decide." She waited, giving him her full attention. "I don't want to hide behind comfort anymore," he said. "I want to take you out. A real date. No assumptions, no pressure. Just the two of us, seeing where it goes." For a brief moment, Lena said nothing. Then she smiled, slow and genuine, the kind that reached her eyes. "I was hoping you'd come over," she replied. Their first date was simple. Dinner at a quiet place nearby, a long walk afterward where conversation flowed easily, punctuated by laughter and thoughtful pauses. There was no need to impress, no need to pretend. They talked about small things and important ones, about how easy it is to miss what's right in front of you when feared is the choosing. When the night ended, they stood outside her door, neither rushing to say goodbye. The future felt open, unwritten, and that was enough. Evan walked home with a calm certainty he hadn't felt in a long time. Sometimes, the right moment doesn't arrive on its own. Sometimes, it waits patiently, right next door, until you finally choose to knock. Morning came differently after that night. Evan noticed it the moment he stepped outside with his coffee. The street looked the same, the air carried the same quiet hum, but something inside him had shifted. For once, he wasn't replaying doubts or missed chances. He was thinking about possibilities. When Lena stepped out moments later, their eyes met naturally, without surprise or hesitation, and they both smiled as if it was the most normal thing in the world. They didn't rush anything. Over the next few days, they found excuses to linger, watering plants at the same time, walking together to the corner store, sitting on opposite porches talking until the sky dimmed. What surprised Evan most was how effortless it felt. There was no pressure to perform, no need to impress. They already knew each other's habits, flaws, and silences. All they were doing now was seeing those familiar things through a new lens. One evening, Lena shared stories Evan had never heard before. Why she moved to this neighborhood, the risks she took leaving behind a life that no longer fit her, the loneliness she'd learned to live with quietly. Evan listened, realizing how easy it is to assume closeness means knowing everything. When it was his turn, he spoke about his fear of choosing wrong, how he'd spent so much time protecting himself that he'd forgotten how to open up. There was no dramatic moment, no sudden declaration. Just understanding. A few weeks later, Evan ran into the same cafe where the blind date had happened. He paused outside for a second, then smiled to himself and kept walking. Some paths existed only to show you what you didn't want. Others were waiting patiently all along. That night, as he and Lena walked side by side down their familiar street, Evan realized something simple but powerful. Courage didn't always look like bold moves or grand gestures. Sometimes it looked like finally asking the question you'd been afraid to hear answered. And sometimes, the best love stories don't begin with strangers at all, but with the person who already knows where you keep your spare key.